Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Today is Monday, October 26th. My name is Will, and these are my thoughts. Roll Tide. Now, you might have seen the title of this video and been a little confused, and just to clear it up before we really get started, no, this video is not about the nature preserve in Alberta, Canada. Different thing. Mount Willmore is a less than clever play on Mount Rushmore. Only this one doesn't have any presidents on it and also didn't involve any displacement of Native Americans or owning any slaves. So really, it's up to you whose is better. Roll Tide again. Instead, Mount Willmore is an exercise that I came up with to try and pick out people in spaces that I wanted my career to go into that I could model my career after. This isn't just a list of my 4 favorites, but it's more along the lines of people whose work I would like to emulate and whose work I have put a lot of time into consuming. Now, I've heard the old adage that you can learn a lot about who you are by the people that you surround yourself with, and I think something similar applies to the career paths that we choose to go down. I think you can look at the voices that you choose to listen to the most and learn a lot about your own voice, who you want to be and why you want to be that way. And these aren't in any particular order in terms of ranking. If anything, it's like more along the lines of who I came to first chronologically. There are 4 names on this list, just like there are 4 presidents on Mount Rushmore, most of which you've probably heard of, but maybe a couple you haven't. I respect every one of these guys a lot, and I'd be lucky if I could even have 10% of their success in class. So without any further build-up, let's get straight into the first entry on Mount Willmore. Number 1, Malcolm Gladwell. Now, if you know me and know anything about me, this really cannot come as that much of a surprise. Malcolm Gladwell is a reporter, writer for The New Yorker, multi-time New York Times best-selling author, mostly in nonfiction, and most recently, and this is probably where I know him the best, is through his podcast, Revisionist History, which is excellent, and you should totally go listen to it instead of watching this. And the list of reasons why I like Malcolm Gladwell is long, but most of it has to do with him being able to take big issues and zoom in on them in a way that is both profoundly entertaining and helps you empathize with them in a way that, to me, is really the way that affects change in people's hearts. And just the sheer range of topics that he covers on revisionist history and outside of it is amazing. I remember one of the first episodes I ever listened to of his show was about McDonald's changing their fry recipes, and it was excellent. I never thought I could get so emotionally invested in Grease. Not the movie Grease, which is terrible, but the actual stuff. But he takes a topic like that and really considers why we like the things that we like and how they got to be that way, and makes you consider the ethical implications of being invested in that thing in a way that you would not expect to be from an episode about fast food. And then he can turn around the next week and do the same thing about race relations. And it's the same level of care that gets put into an episode about Curtis LeMay and carpet bombing in World War II and public golf courses in Los Angeles and how it affects the population. And probably my biggest criticism of Malcolm is that he does have the occasional just piping hot take, like that we should cancel football. Ugh. Roll Tide, Malcolm. Can't take away my Roll Tide. But even then, the take itself is so well researched and thought out that no matter how controversial it may be, you still have to sit back and think, there may actually be something to this. And I've mostly talked about his podcast here, but his books are also excellent. I think my favorite among them is probably Outliers, which I read on our most recent beach trip. Just the way that he molds this very personal take, highlighting these 2 case studies about how circumstance really does dictate success, I think is a very relevant issue, and, as is typical of him, a very well-constructed argument around what he's trying to say. So yeah, if you haven't listened to Revisionist History, go do that. And while you're at it, go pick up Outliers or Tipping Point or David and Goliath or really anything that Malcolm has ever been involved with, including his most recent commercial with Kevin Hart, which was a pleasant surprise and actually pretty funny. Number 2, Stephen Colbert. Now this one, in terms of like my actual hobbies and interests and like my career path hopefully going forward, isn't a super direct connection. This is just a person that I greatly admire and spend a lot of time watching what he does. If you don't know, Stephen Colbert is currently the host of The Late Show, but he was previously on Comedy Central and world-renowned for his show that came on after The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, or Rapport, as the true fans of the show like to call it. He actually interviewed Malcolm Gladwell on his show, coincidentally. But I like Stephen first and foremost because he, like me, is a Southerner. Although he mostly got his start doing comedy with Second City in Chicago, Stephen is originally from Charleston, South Carolina, my current home state. And while I am a very big fan of his work on The Late Show, I think it's just Stephen as a person that I admire. He, like me, is a big fan of Lord of the Rings, but unlike me, he is such a big fan and has such a big platform that he actually got to be in one of the Hobbit movies. Also, like me, he's a bit of a nerd for English, and he pretty frequently quotes major works on his show. And it's not even like in a way that he's trying to be pretentious. Like, he just does it. Like, oh yeah, this thing that's happening over here in the political sphere is just like this thing that happened in, something that James Joyce wrote. And he does a really interesting balancing act between how just like world-class funny he is and also how good of an interviewer he is, and how he does legitimately put pressure on the people that he brings on his show, but not in a way that's trying to embarrass them, but in a way that, actual journalists could, benefit from watching. He spends a lot of time critiquing political figures, but you can tell that he spent a lot more time actually thinking about the issues that he's confronting them on. And it's that balance between being goofy and being serious that I think makes Stephen Colbert a very worthy inclusion on this list. Number 3, Roger Bennett. If there's any name that you'd hear on this list and be like, who? This is probably the one. But for those of you that don't know, Roger Bennett is a soccer commentator who previously worked at ESPN, wrote and did a lot of pieces for them. And then once NBC Sports got the broadcast rights for the Premier League back in 2013, he transitioned over there. And now he is one of the 2 members of the Men in Blazers show on NBC Sports, which is a personal favorite of mine, along with Michael Davies, who is best known for being the lead producer on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And their show together is primarily about soccer, and I'm trying to come up with a better word to describe it besides just ridiculous. And my biggest connection to Roger is probably the podcast that he made a couple years ago for WNYC called American Fiasco, which was all about the U.S.'s World Cup trip in 1998 and how it didn't go nearly as well as they thought it might, and all of the various steps and missteps that led to that. I can pretty vividly remember driving back from Asheville to Birmingham, which is about a 6-hour drive, and thankfully the podcast was about 6 hours as well. And I just remember being so entertained by the show, but also sort of awed by how comprehensive and in-depth it was, but not in a way that was boring or tedious. It's sort of the best case scenario for a sports documentary. It's a deep dive, but in a way that you sort of lose track of how deep the dive is. And it's that show and Roger's approach to it that led me to start making Green and Gold. In a very real way, I can credit my venture into podcasting and creating that sort of documentary type storytelling to that show. So if you haven't watched Men in Blazers, whether you're a soccer fan or not, I would encourage it, and hopefully through that experience you'll see why I chose to include Roger Bennett on Mount Willmore. Number 4, John Green. Now, in terms of career choices, this is probably the one that is the most direct correlate between me and somebody on Mount Willmore. Like, literally, if I could make my life look like another person's, it would probably be John Green's. If you've been living under a rock for the past, 12 years, and you're watching this on YouTube, probably, so the likelihood of you not knowing who John Green is pretty small. But John Green is a world-famous novelist, primarily for a book called The Fault in Our Stars, but he's also one half of the Vlogbrothers, which is sort of a bedrock YouTube institution, for lack of a better term. He and his brother Hank have been doing weekly videos for the past, I think it's 13 years now. And even though I'm pretty late to that party, they have crafted this community that is, first of all, enormous, and secondly, very tight-knit. And no matter what kind of community I'm able to create with this show or through writing or whatever, I would hope that it would have people that are that invested in it. Like at any level, they have millions of subscribers, but even if I only end up getting, 25, like, I hope that those 25 feel like they're welcome and really a part of what I'm trying to do. And he also, of course, has ventured into podcast territory. His show, which is called The Anthropocene Reviewed, which is excellent, just takes one usually pretty off-the-wall and eclectic aspect of the Anthropocene, which is a human-dominated world, and reviews it. And not dissimilar to Malcolm Gladwell's show, although the things that he talks about can be, pretty, I don't want to say arcane, but they can definitely be pretty niche or weird. You end up leaving the episode with sort of a better understanding of the world, and that's just like such a John Green tactic to bring everything back to meaning and, how we connect to each other and how to make the world a better place. I don't think that's a bad thing either. Like, hopefully someday people associate me with something like that. And what I think is funny about this inclusion is that while I would say that John Green may be the strongest sort of element of this whole process, is also the latest. Like, I didn't really get into, especially his YouTube channel, until the last year or so. And he's been a public figure for 12, 15 years. I can remember watching one of his videos without realizing I was watching one of his videos back in high school. And now that I know who he is a lot more, I watched a lot of his educational content, which, forget the books, forget the other YouTube stuff. Crash Course in and of itself is a fantastic just contribution to human society. So those are my 4. And I don't want to say top 4, but those are the 4 that I have chosen to put on Mount Willmore. But what I would love to see from this video is, whether you're watching on YouTube or on IGTV, if you would please, down in the comment section below, put your 4. Just give me a Mount whatever more. I want to know who you included, and if you have some time, why you included them. And what I would also encourage you to do is to look at those 4, recognize the commonalities between the 4 people on there, and try and extrapolate that a little bit out into what that might say about you and who you want to be. I'm Will, those are my thoughts, and I'll see you guys next Monday. Wait, no, just kidding. I will not see you guys next Monday for 2 reasons. First of all, my wife and I are going back home for the weekend, so I will not have time to make a video, but also because next Monday is the day before Election Day. And while we're on that topic, please, go vote. I'm planning on going and voting early this week. I would have done absentee, but South Carolina is one of those states where you have to have like 12 different people sign off that it's you before you can actually send in your ballot and have it count. They're just really worried about that massive voter fraud, Massive voter fraud. But if you have a second, after you're done listing your 4 names in the comment section, just put like an exclamation point or something, just so I can know that you voted and we voted and that we've all done our part to contribute to our democracy. And so for real this time, I'm Will. Those are my thoughts, and I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.